Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Nordic Sound, a living archive for Nordic music. As always, I am your host, Jameson Foster, and today we are joined by a special and unique guest, Fredrik Akselsen. And I say unique because typically we interview people who are first and foremost musicians here on the Nordic Sound. But once in a while, I make an exception when I meet someone and learn about a topic that I think is just fascinating and 100% worth talking about. And in this case, Ingrid from Songleikr introduced me via social media to Fredrik, who recently directed and wrote a docu-series called Trollstemt, or Troll Tuning. And old listeners of the channel are right now going to see why we're going to be having this conversation. Trollstemt is a documentary on the trollish history behind Norwegian folk music. But before we get into that, Fredrik, would you like to say hi to everyone?
Hello, everyone.
And also, of course, would you like to say a little bit more about yourself? Because this is really our first time meeting. So if you just like to introduce yourself a little bit so people can get to know sort of who you are, where you're coming from, before we get into the documentary itself. I'm sure people would love to learn more about you before we start talking.
For sure. I did my studies I became in love with film from the age of
Mm-hmm.
12 years old. So I wanted to get into the regional film club. And
Mm-hmm.
I memorized all of James Cagney's movies from 1930 to 1984 when I was 12 years old to prove I was old enough to be a member. And they listened to me until like 1933. And then it was like, okay, we get it, we get it.
Oh, that's
Uh,
amazing.
I've been in love with film and TV sort of most of my life. Did my studies in Norway and Australia. And then I started making movies with Ingrid's husband, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So we did 4 films together about everything from Catholic exorcism, black metal music, a couple of war films as well.
Amazing.
And then I've been doing a number of documentaries, TV series, true crime, culture stuff, even
Mm-hmm.
in entertainment, sort of trying to get as many tools in my toolbox as possible
Mm-hmm.
as a director. And this Troll Tuned series came to me. They called me up and say, we have this, the history of Norwegian folk music, and we need it to be young and broad because we have a problem this was for the national broadcaster, and they said we have a problem reaching the youth. Could you do a history of Norwegian folk music for young people? And I thought, wow, that's quite a challenge.
That's
Because,
intimidating.
yeah,
Yeah.
and especially considering the way that Norwegian folk music has been presented on the Norwegian broadcaster has been to take these old male fiddlers and place them in a rural area, sort
Mm-hmm.
of driving them out onto a field and having them, play the fiddle for no one.
Yep.
And then do a very sort of pedagogic interview afterwards, talking
Mm-hmm.
about, oh yeah, Mr. This and that. This must be a nice place to get inspiration. And you can just tell that the old fiddler has never been to this area. Like yeah, well, I like playing the fiddle, and then yeah, it goes on from there.
Yep.
So I thought at least we cannot do it like that.
Mm-hmm.
That will reach hardly anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I started, doing research and having this black metal documentary in the background. I found all these completely fascinating sort of supernatural nature, sort of nature religious sort of points
Mm-hmm.
from the history. You had tunes that were called the one that the devil played when he buried his mother, stuff like that, like all these kind of sort of really out there kind of titles for these fiddle tunes.
Mm-hmm.
So okay, so if we can start off, presenting the mystic, sort of mysterious story of Norwegian folk music, this
Mm-hmm.
could actually reach, into something more engaging.
Mm-hmm.
uh, so now the series opens with this guy who wants to play himself into a trance
Mm-hmm.
using the fiddle, and we see all these fast forward images of nature. And he is both a fiddler and what do you call it? It's called an act model in Norwegian. It's a nude model who poses
Oh,
for
okay.
art students
Hmm.
to get the anatomy right. So he's standing there with his fiddle in the nude. So it was trying to break with the perception that this was going to be just another old man regional
I
stuff.
love that. From the very beginning, you're already saying this is not your
Yeah,
typical, as we talked about, this is not your typical butter churning Lutheran story of Norwegian fiddling. If you're just starting it out with a nude guy fiddling himself into a
yeah,
trance, right? That
yeah,
from the beginning is saying this is not your grandpa's fiddling documentary.
for sure. And I think I was lucky in a way that the Norwegian broadcaster was so desperate because they weren't reaching the young, that they
Mhm.
really trusted me in trying to do something different.
Yep.
For this, that it wasn't expected to do more of the same in a way. And
Hmm.
that was a great sort of benefit from doing it, that they had the funding and they allowed me to sort of work this out in a way.
That is so
Uh,
cool.
so that was the idea. And what I also found, I started going to the clubs around Norway, and what I found was there is a really pulsating folk music club scene where
Hmm.
people go to dance traditional sort of 1600, 1700, 1800 style
Hmm.
dance in clubs in Norway. So wow, this is something I've never seen before. I haven't heard about it, but it was this sort of bustling young, what you call it? It's the I can't remember the word in English now. It's the
Hmm.
LGBTQ. The
Yep.
community has
Hmm.
actually gotten into this folk dance
Hmm.
style. So it's sort of become a very broad, young, alternative
Hmm.
way of doing folk music. And you also have the older generations.
Hmm.
So you can see people in their 60s, 70s, or even 80s dancing together with young people in these clubs.
Hmm.
So this is something that has been sort of created as an underground movement. And I found all my four main characters in sort of in or within this sort of community,
Hmm.
especially Mattias Thedens,
Hmm.
who plays a Norwegian American who plays in a rock folk music band called
Oh yeah,
Gangar.
we've had Gangar on the channel before. But Matthias, last time I was in Oslo, he met me for a beer. So
Oh,
yeah,
great.
I love Matthias, and people who watch the Nordic Sound will be very familiar with Gangar. Yeah, so
Great.
I loved. He's actually how I learned about this documentary first, as I was telling
Okay,
you.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So sorry to
So,
interrupt. I just wanted to point that out.
so he is one of, and also a guy called Kenneth Lien who plays in
Yep. I
Evestaden.
had him. Yep, he was on the channel too. Yeah, I love
There you
love
go.
everything he does on the jaw harp. It's amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So we sort of found these new voices that hadn't been presented before.
Hmm.
So I realized that instead of telling the history of Norwegian folk music starting in the 1400s and then sort of working your way to today, we
Hmm.
started today and then we went back into the sort of mystical roots, back into the sort of and rather than doing it chronologically, we did it thematically. So
Okay.
the first episode was about the mysticism. Second was about tradition. The third was about the rebels, and the fourth was actually about sort of going abroad, the success of it,
Hmm.
where we followed a guy called Olav Mjelva,
Okay.
he has been to Hollywood actually, and the sound for the is it called the Rings of Power series?
Yep.
Uh, the theme for the Sauron character, the sort of the main bad guy, is played on the Hardanger fiddle.
I had a feeling that was because the name was very familiar to me, and I do remember that being the Hardanger fiddle. And
Yeah,
that was a trope that they kept from. Wasn't it the Hardanger fiddle that plays the Rohan theme in the
yeah,
original film
it's
series?
true.
Yep. Yep.
It's true. So the fourth episode was sort of about taking Norwegian folk music out into the world and trying
Hmm.
to present it to different audiences. Especially America seems to be a very open country for this kind of music, which is,
Yep.
amazing
We love
because
our
you have
fiddling. We love our fiddling here. We
that's
do.
that's
Yeah.
wonderful. Yeah. No, so I actually got to go to Seattle and then to Los Angeles with Olaf
Hmm.
to film some meetings with Norwegian Americans, and also with the guy called Bear McCreary
Yep.
did the soundtrack for the. So he got to play the hard anger fiddle for Bear in the
It's so
sequence.
cool.
So no, it was a great experience because
Mhm.
most often I do independent or commercial products, and it's always, of course, an economic barrier. But when it came to folk music and the national broadcaster, it was so much easier to say, I need to take a trip to Germany with Gangar, or I need to go to
Mhm.
America with this guy. And it was like, okay, so that was, I don't know, I read now that you're going to be cutting government spending in America. I,
Yeah, don't get me started on that.
I might not say too much because they're going to start cutting the.
Yeah,
Elon
yeah.
Musk is going to come to Norway as well, but
Yeah, this has been a that's been actually been a long standing problem ever since 2 years ago. I had Hoovendruven on
yeah.
and they were talking about how it's just getting harder and harder to come to the States for this sort of stuff. And I just yeah, so this has been a long standing and
All right.
growing problem of Scandinavian musicians finding it harder and harder to come to the United States for
Oh, okay.
obvious political reasons.
Oh, okay.
We
Okay.
don't like outsiders anymore. We don't want to hear your music. Well, yeah, let's not get into that.
No, for sure. No, so that was the idea of the series, was to do it sort of thematically, and then the first thing I learned on film school was that film is emotions, or film is feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, the second episode about tradition, we followed two young girls, 17-year-old, who was fifth generation fiddler from their sort of community, and their
Okay.
grandfather was a huge star. He was one of the guys that the national broadcaster had put in the field, if you know what I mean. Uh, and the father was also, like, in the Olympics in Lillehammer. He was the guy who brought all the fiddlers out for the opening ceremony. So
Cool.
this was like a huge family in the Gudbrandsdale, which is one of the sort of
Mm-hmm.
regional parts of Norway, and they were supposed to be, following in the father's footsteps, and actually, and this is strange, the day after he started teaching them the fiddle, he had a heart attack, and the girls were crying, saying, is this going to be the end of the tradition?
Mm-hmm.
And then the aunt, which is called Jarnfrid, which means iron, like it's an
Yep.
iron lady. It's one of these Viking names,
Yep.
which symbolizes strength. And she did have enormous strength. She
Mm-hmm.
said these girls are going to be taught the tradition no matter what. So she helped them up, and luckily for us, on the what would have been the father's 70th birthday in the Gudbrandsdale, they had the huge Norwegian competition
Mm-hmm.
in fiddling and song, and they won the competition. And the tears are, streaming down the faces
Ah,
and
that's so
everything.
amazing.
So yeah, so we were quite lucky as well. But to find, to show what tradition means instead of trying to explain it with,
Mhm.
this tradition is something blah 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 blah. So
Yeah,
this was
show, don't tell, right?
show don't tell, yeah, for sure.
Exactly.
That was the idea, and we were lucky, especially
Mhm.
in that episode, that we were able to show how much tradition meant, and not only just say it.
I think, yeah, beautifully said, and I'm really glad that you had the opportunity to do it that way because, yeah, as an educator, I also find the same thing. When I'm teaching someone what a music is, I there's way more value in me dedicating more of the class to actually listening to and watching the music than me talking about it, right? Especially with when it comes to traditions, just let them speak for themselves. It's a lot more, it's a lot more powerful.
For
And
sure.
yeah, so it's, I think it's really cool the way that we talk about how there's this one standard way that the tradition has been told about. And that is one that is primarily told by, again, the butter churning Lutherans, where it's this nice, traditional, conservative, in a lot of ways Puritan tradition that, is the soul of Norway. And it's just as you say, the old guy sitting on the roof of his barn playing just for himself. And this is the narrative of fiddling that has been accepted as the only narrative of Norwegian fiddling for a very long time. And you and I are both sort of doing the same thing, which is why I'm so stoked to talk to you about this, where we're in many ways trying to create a different memory. If you want to get really into like the philosophy of it, it would be like what Foucault called a counter memory, where we are sort of like trying to tell a story that doesn't exactly line up with the established narrative, but
Mm.
is still a very real history nonetheless. And this is the very real history of the unsavory, mystic, esoteric, magical side, spiritual side, even
Mm.
of Norwegian fiddling that you have used this docu-series to really try and establish as another side of the story. And
For sure.
yeah, so from there, it's just I feel like we could go in so many different directions as to like not only the process of getting fiddlers to talk about this other side, because what I've also found happens is that when you do have the more Puritan narrative, especially with the history of the fiddles being burned or
Mm.
outlawed, or
Yeah.
destroyed, you create this internalized sense of, maybe shame is a little bit of a heavy-handed word, but you at least create this side where people don't want, over time people stop talking about the trolls, right?
Yeah.
Because since the 1800s they've sort of been read out of the story. So
Mm.
I think this is where I want to start with this is, what was it like getting especially older fiddlers to open up about this side of fiddling if it has sort of been seen as risque or unsavory to talk about it? That would be definitely what I want to ask you first, is what was that been
Yeah.
like? How was it? Easy? Was it difficult? Anything you want to say about it?
For sure. It was a little bit of both, I would say, that um, a number of the older generation now sort of came up during the 60s and 70s.
Mm-hmm.
So they had this sort of, I wouldn't say hippie, but at least they had this sort of background
The
of
flavor. Yeah.
a flavor of counterculture
Yep,
in a way.
beautiful.
So it wasn't like there were elements of this very sort of conservative idea. And
Mm-hmm.
we went with Kenneth Lean in the first episode to Setesdalen, which is the region that God and everyone else forgot about. Like off, it's the most off the grid place in Norway, which is off the grid, you
Yeah.
know, generally because it's right next to the North Pole in a way. In the you
Yeah,
know,
that's funny. So if Norway is already considered in general to be the place that is forgotten about, it's the off the grid country. I'm
yeah,
imagining what off the grid means by Norwegian standards, and
yeah.
that's got to
So
be
this
really out there. Yeah.
it is out there for sure, and we went there because that was the place where they still do this. It's called the Rammerslotten.
Mm-hmm.
It's the hard way of playing where you play so intensely and so long that you go into a trance, and
Mm-hmm.
that you feel that the fiddle is no longer yours to control. Something else is playing the fiddle,
Mm-hmm.
and even if you put down the bow, the fiddle keeps playing. Is the idea. And the father of this old man that we met did the documentary for a Danish broadcast
Mm-hmm.
where he was saying this absolutely, with a straight face, that he quite often went into this trance like,
Mm-hmm.
and the son also had done that a number of times, but
Mm-hmm.
and he now was in his 70s, the son, and he was afraid of it because he felt that he came into contact with something
Hmm.
otherworldly. If it was the devil or if it was the whatever it was, he sort of came into contact with something that was so deep, far down in his, being or soul or consciousness or wherever, sort of it comes from, that he was now, after a life of fiddling, he was starting to sort of tell the young guys like Kenneth, don't go into the Rammerslott because it's such an intense, dangerous
Hmm.
emotion because you might not be able to get back out in a
Yep.
way.
Hmm.
Uh, and this is something that has been known in Norway since the Viking sagas. There's a saga from the 1300s called Bose saga,
Hmm.
where they were talking about Rammerslotten and this sort of trance-like way of playing. So this is something that has been in the sort of Norwegian psyche all the way back to the pre-Christian,
Hmm.
really sort of way back Nordic, way of looking at the world.
Hmm.
So he was afraid in a way of this, and I think it was the 1980s was the first time that they actually got to play in a church, because the church and the Norwegian folk music had been separated so sharply,
Hmm.
and it was sort of the underground music. Uh, so and this is sort of after the Black Plague in the 1300s.
Hmm.
Norway sort of lost all more than half of its population.
Yep.
So it became part of Denmark, and then it was part of Sweden for 500 years.
Hmm.
And the Danes had a rule that you had to use Danish government musicians. So
Yep.
it was sort of like you had to, bring them in from Copenhagen, or they
Hmm.
came to Norway, and you had to use their music to play
Yep.
um, in weddings and all that stuff. So
Hmm.
so most of what we know about Norwegian folk music from the 16, 1700s is from the court
Hmm.
uh, documents, actually, because it was illegal, but people still wanted to use their own music.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's underground, and they paid the fiddler, and then they knew they had to pay the fine as well,
Hmm.
uh, to the government for using. Uh, and this was in 1740. Was the first time that a Norwegian folk music song has been written down.
Hmm.
This was two Danes uh, who were sort of bullying the farming community.
Yep. As is tradition.
Yeah,
As is.
for sure, and we still don't like the Danes
Yeah,
because of
right.
it.
Ah. Yep.
So no, so the farmers decided to play a trick on the Danes, and they invited them to go into the sort of, this was in the middle of winter, so it was cold and it was dark and snow and all that stuff. And they took them to this sort of mountain cave,
Hmm.
and they said that, you think you guys can know how to play? We have the spirits of the mountain with us, and they know how to play music. So they started, they were sitting there drinking a little bit, which probably played into it.
Yep.
And then they started hearing the music in the mountain. And these Danes, in a completely different time, they thought it was, mountain dwellers playing. Uh, so one of them is said to have fainted and was being carried away because he got such a shock when he heard this. And the other Dane, who was sort of conscious, he wrote down the music he heard, and that's the first recording of a Norwegian folk music tune that's ever been recorded.
Oh, that is
Uh,
so cool.
and we did this as a sort of dramatization, where we
Hmm.
had two arrogant-looking guys, playing Danes, and and farmers, and we had a local fiddler who was there to play. And
Hmm.
this was next to a mountain called the Jötul Mountain, and all the way back to, as far as we know, young children have been tossing sort of rocks at the gate, which it looks like it could open,
Hmm.
like in the mountain. And they say, Jötul, come out. And it's sort of a huge mountain troll.
Hmm.
And when this local fiddler, and this was in 2023, when he noticed that he was next to the Jötul gate, he panicked. I can't play, because he had was planning to play sort of a bit of a risque
Mhm.
folk music song, if you know what I mean. I can only play wedding songs, he said, because if I play something else next to the Jötul mountain, I don't know what's gonna happen.
Oh, that is so cool. So before what I want to go down with that is that the next thing that I think I would follow up with is this idea of, is there a genuine belief in trolls and giants among the fiddlers, or is it more of like a Santa Claus thing where everyone plays
Yeah.
along? Is Yeah. So what is your, because that
Mm,
story right there tells me that there's kind of a sincere
yeah.
belief in them, right? Because
Yeah.
especially when I give my there's a conference paper that I've been giving at Scandinavian Studies and Musicology stuff, about this troll history with fiddling. And the first question I always get is, well, do they really believe in the trolls, or are they just playing along with the fairy tale type thing? And that it's a complicated question just to begin with.
Mm,
But I would love, from your perspective, doing
yeah.
this documentary, did you find that it was, if we were to put it on a spectrum between sincere belief or playing along, where did you find that fiddlers tended to land there?
Yeah, I would say that sort of city folk and country folk are a little bit different there,
Mm-hmm.
because the people in the cities, there is a saying in Norway that all the all the mystical creatures disappeared when electricity came to Norway. So
Okay.
sort of, as the sort of modernity came into
Mm-hmm.
society, less and less of sort of mythical creatures seem to appear, like trolls and gnomes and
Mm-hmm.
elves, and there were, a huge number of things.
Yep.
But especially in places like Setesdal, which I mentioned, Gudbrandsdal, even Telemark, which are three sort of major communities for the folk music that has had traditions going back to the 1600s,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even longer. Uh, there still is, I don't know if it's a belief, but it is a respect, at least, for the
Okay.
kind of, and not among everyone at all,
Mm-hmm.
but still there is this sort of wariness about, playing too much roughshod with nature in a way, or there
Mm-hmm.
is something going on there that is very fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And there is one of the major creatures in the sort of creation myths of
Mm-hmm.
Norwegian folk music is called the
The
Fossegrimen.
Fossegrim, yep.
Yeah, it's the spirit in the mountain falls
Mm-hmm.
who teaches the fiddlers how to play. And that is sort of the old tradition where Millarguten, one of the major Norwegian artists, he learned from the Fossegrim. But now, they're in the sort of modern world.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they now know that since it was illegal during the era of the sort of Danish rule, people went to the mountain falls because you couldn't hear what they were playing. So
This
that
is the first time I'm hearing that. I have never considered that before. That that's amazing.
yeah.
That
So
is so
so so
cool.
partly that, and partly to sort of get away from work, tedious farm labor, they would sort of sneak away, go to the mountains or to the waterfalls, and then learn how to play that way. So I think those kind of explanations have, become mainstream. So even the guy who was talking about the trance and all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff, he sort of went with the sort of more modern way of looking at
Mm-hmm.
Fossegrim and this kind of thing, that it wasn't a real creature, it was sort of a symbol of
A
inspiration,
symbol. Yep.
and that kind of stuff. So no, so all that. It's a difficult question to
Yep.
answer, because people are so different as well. So some of them are extremely sort of no nonsense modern type skeptics in a way, who
Yeah, yeah.
who loves to play the fiddle, but they don't really believe in anything. And then you have the people who seem to be more open to.
Mhm.
I guess like people are in most of the world, that some people are skeptics and some people
Yep.
are believers in a way.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know if I have a sort of a definitive answer for you. That
Well, that's the closest thing to an answer I could have ever hoped for. So,
okay,
because
that's
it is,
good.
when I get ambushed with that question, the what I want to say is, well, it actually starts with, even if you do have a genuine belief in, trolls, gnomes, uh, does the person feel comfortable enough admitting that, or is it something they just keep
Yeah,
to themselves, right? Um,
yeah,
and so, yeah, it's a very complicated question to answer, but what the perspective you just gave, it helps a lot, especially with that angle of Fossegrim being a symbol for just the escapism of
yeah,
people when they want to play music. They either go to the waterfall because they can't let anyone hear them, and so in that way the waterfall becomes this symbol of safety or haven for musicians. And
yeah,
then, as is conventional in folklore, is you take that natural thing and you make it a person, and in that way
yeah.
the waterfall becomes the person in Fossegrim. uh, so that
It's
is
true.
just so fascinating to me. And because also, what you bring up is also very, very true, right? Is you have all of these different spirits, right? These land spirits that are associated with music. You have the
Mm,
Fossegrim, you have the Nuck,
yeah,
you have Stromkarl over in Sweden, but then you also have the Bekkahest, who's the
yeah.
horse, right?
Hmm.
That you pluck the hair from and you string it to your bow. And then one of my favorite Swedish folk tales is about, actually, I'm now realizing, is about Romeslund, where the guy succeeds in plucking a hair off of the Bekkahest's tail, strings it up to his bow, and then accidentally plays himself into a trance while
Yeah.
someone is lodging him, and he accidentally makes like their furniture come to life. But then
Yeah.
when the guy lodging him stops him, the musician thanks the guy, but says it was very dangerous for you to touch me, because the devil himself was playing me and I was just his instrument. He would have played me to death if you didn't stop me. um,
Yeah.
so there is that very scary side of fiddling. And we were talking with Ingrid and Maria, where that might actually be why the church became so weary of this
Yeah.
kind of music, because it it opens up a lot of things in you that a lot of church teachings are trying to get you to suppress. So
For sure.
it is antagonistic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And also, many of these spirits go all the way back to the Nordic tradition, to the sort of Viking era
Mm-hmm.
religions. So it's something that also was, it was kept even though Norway was officially, a Christian country, and
Mm-hmm.
also became it over time. It became for sure
Mm-hmm.
a majority Christian country. For a long time, we sort of kept the spirits alive in a way, as a part of the sort of, especially in the rural areas. It
Mm-hmm.
was a part of almost like not a liberating, but a sort of a feeling of in Norway we call it selvråde. It means that you're self-governed, I guess you could
Okay.
say. If that's probably not a very
Yeah.
good
No,
translation.
I like that.
So yeah, and we still sort of use the names. It's funny that the word gnome now, now that we've had an election in America,
Mm-hmm.
there is now a word in Norway called TV gnome, which is the Norwegian who goes on TV and tries to explain America to the Norwegian audience. Because we all, everyone now has internet and Facebook and TikTok and whatever. So everyone's sort of making up their own minds. And then you have these guys who come on, or girls, and they come on and they attempt to explain America to the Norwegians. And everyone feels that they know more than the gnomes. So the
It's so
TV
funny.
gnome is the America expert now
Yeah.
in Norway.
Oh, that's amazing. Um, yeah, so I guess from here, unless you have anything else you want to say on that specific topic, where what I would love to ask is what you learned about, I could take an anthropologist's point of view and go through, the history from, an academic sense of how trolls in this exact process of Christianization that we were talking about, trolls become the devil, right?
Yep.
And also, and I'm using the word troll loosely because at least as I understand it, the troll used to be a general term for all land spirits. So
Yep.
for anyone listening, you might think of like a Tolkien troll, like the guys that turn to stone. But at least in this conversation, when I say troll, I actually mean anything that would be supernatural.
Mm.
And so over time, the trolls become interchangeable with devils
Yep.
because of this history that you brought up of it going all the way back to pagan times.
Mm.
So I'm curious, did you find when you were talking to these musicians, did they see a difference between trolls and devils or trolls and Satan, or are they still or do the fiddlers see, when they say, oh, I'm getting too close to the devil, are they also talking about trolls, or are they specifically talking about the devil?
Yeah, I would say regionally,
Mm-hmm.
especially in Gudbrandsdale, this place where I just mentioned the fiddler, the Jötul, this creature that lived in a mountain, sometimes went out into the population and took on human form,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe with a tail or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And people were sort of arguing, is he a troll or is he a devil? So this was sort of, even back in the 1700s, there were discussions going on about, what is the actual origin of this? Is it troll and Satan? So it's been a conversation
Mm-hmm.
for, probably 500 years, maybe even more. And it seems to me now that the devil has sort of become the main focal point of this, is my impression.
Okay.
What is now often used as the sort of one of those origin myths is called Fanitullen, uh,
Yep.
uh, which we also recreated. And I used an Iranian black metal artist that I had filmed who moved to Norway. I had done a documentary about him, some years back.
What
And
is
now
this artist called?
he's called Sina.
Okay.
From the Westland is his albums. He does Iranian black metal music.
I have
Uh,
I have an Iranian colleague here
oh yeah.
who is specifically studying death metal in Iran.
Oh, he might
And
be. That
he
might be a
might
choice.
know him,
Yeah.
but if he
Yeah.
doesn't, I'm now really stoked to be like, hey, man, guess what? I got.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I just needed to make sure I got the name of that. But yeah, so
Sure.
you had him in the
Yeah.
scene.
No, and we bought horse feet from a local farmer, and
Okay.
sort of because the story was that this guy was walking around, and they suddenly realized that he was walking on hoofs and not on feet, and that made them realize this was the devil.
Yep.
Uh, but the story with that and also with other ones are sort of interchanging with trolls, other spirits,
Hmm.
fossegrim, all that. So I don't know if I have an exact sort of knowledge of troll or Satan, but
Hmm.
I know I feel that mostly it's the devil that is
Okay.
sort of used in the songs or in the sort of origin myths now. But you still
Yeah.
have, the pitch from the Norwegian national broadcaster was to call it the heritage
Okay.
series, and I said no one's gonna watch the heritage. I'm sorry, and especially young and broad and all that stuff. No one will, turn on TV. Oh wow, there's the heritage.
Wow, heritage. I can't wait.
Heritage, yeah. So I said we have to have a more interesting, sexy, engaging title, So it ended up being called Troll Tuned,
Hmm.
because that is a way of tuning the fiddle so that you can get to play, yourself into a trance.
Hmm.
Then you troll tune the fiddle. So for sure, the trolls still have uh, uh, um, a place in the Norwegian folk music, but I haven't heard many sort of believing in it in a way. I think
Hmm.
the trolls have become a little bit, like you say, more towards the sort of mythological figures.
Okay.
I would say, and it's used now, in tourism, for example.
Hmm.
So when I did this black metal film, we had a Colombian Satanist who came to Norway to see the land of Satan, and he saw this small sort of tourist troll, and he said, "Brutal, brutal." It was like the most brutal thing he'd seen was this troll, which is smiling and with a bushy tail and all
Yeah,
that
yeah.
stuff. So
This is just, I just find it so fascinating how hard it is to actually answer this question, troll or Satan.
yeah.
Because especially when you talk about back in the 1600s and 1700s, there's this conversation about the shapeshifter,
Mm,
where is he a troll, is he a devil, he has a tail, all of this. One of the original signs of a troll was that it was a person but with animal features.
yeah.
And so when you tell me this story of you have this guy with fanatulen walking around with hooves for feet, that shows you how complicated it gets, because
Mm,
hooves for feet could be a troll thing, but
yeah.
also hooves is very much a Satan thing. So
Yeah.
you that story actually shows how much the imagery of trolls and devils have become pretty much one and the same. Because you're talking about fanatulen, but even Horgoloten over in Sweden
Yeah.
has the same thing. They're dancing the ring around the fiddler, and one at a time they're like, does he have a tail? Does he have horns? And then one of them goes, a buckfoot. And then all of a sudden they realize it's too late. And by the time they realize that he has a hoof for a foot, um, it's too late and they're played to death. Um, so all of this is why I'm so stoked to be able to talk to you about this, because
But
this is just so fascinating. Yeah, please continue.
yeah, and I just remember now a
Mm-hmm.
very strange story in the way that Fanitulen is sort of this. If you're to ask a Norwegian what is the sort of quintessential Norwegian song, it's Fanitulen.
Yep.
Uh, and what we found out in the fourth episode about the successes in folk music, Norway was losing year after year in the Eurovision Song Contest.
Yeah.
And you had this ambitious guy who said, we need to win. And if we're to win, we need to use folk elements
Yep.
because we keep, putting out these morons with guitars and no one's interested. So let's, find someone who can play the fiddle.
Mm-hmm.
And Alexander Rybak, who did the song Fairy Tale, which won the Eurovision Song Contest, we got to hear the first version of Fairy Tale ever recorded,
Mm-hmm.
and he doesn't play the signature sound, he plays Fanitulen.
That is so
So,
cool.
so Fanitulen was the original Fairy Tale. And he did the I'm in love with the fairy tale, all that, the
Mm-hmm.
song. And then he played Fanitulen instead of doing his now famous sort of fiddle riff.
Mm-hmm.
So all the way up until today, sort of Fanitulen keeps sort of making a presence
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Norwegian music.
That is so cool. This is one of my favorite conversations I've ever had doing this podcast.
Wow, good.
I've been doing this for 3 years at this point, and this is a highlight for me. I'm
Okay,
I'm totally nerding out right now. Um, so I think if I feel like we might have now milked the troll conversation dry a little bit, just because of how uncertain these answers are. But as much as I love having this conversation, I do have to acknowledge at a point that we're now getting into the same walls we keep hitting. But I think the more that we have these conversations, the closer we get to having those answers. But for now, landing on this idea that the trolls or the devils, maybe they're the same thing, are still very present in the tradition.
Yeah,
And whether or not you are on the side of the spectrum of playing along like Santa Claus, or no, I have a healthy respect, maybe even a fear for these land spirits, they're still a part of the conversation, which is just, that is so cool to me. Um, so,
yeah, that's sort of
yeah,
it's the gin in the Campari of life, to be able to play with this that you don't every sort of thing that you don't know. I find this a fascinating area to explore.
exactly. The less we know, I think there's that nice balance between what we know and what we don't know is what makes these conversations so much fun to have.
Yeah,
God, yeah, I just love this. So we were talking about if we want to get away from the esoteric side and talk to more about the concrete, things about fiddling and folk music. that are in this documentary too. I think a good segue would be to just talk about in this, so to segue from the esoteric to things about, social gatherings and, these communities around fiddling. We were talking a little bit before I hit the record button about censorship maybe being a bit of a heavy-handed word, but by virtue of you doing this for the NRK, you have to think about how you present certain things, and so considering I'm not sure if you've been on any other podcast to talk about this, I want to give you an underground, decentralized, smash the system platform for you to talk openly about things that you had to repackage or think of talking about in a different way that might have not been suitable for the people who were paying you to make the documentary. So free for all right here.
One thing I might start with is, the idea of calling it the heritage.
Yep.
And me saying that's not sort of strong enough. So I went all the way to a different direction, and I said, let's call it Satan's music. That was sort of my pitch, and to play on it in a number of ways, like this damn music in a way, or this damn music, and also it has many sort of connotations in Norwegian.
That would have been a cool title too. This damned music, because you're right, that word has a lot of angles.
Yeah. So that was the idea, and they polled their audiences, and they said, if we are to call it Satan's music, we're losing half the country, or the sort of the religious part of the country is gonna say, screw this, I'm not watching Satan's music.
Yep.
So I had to find something else, and that's how we ended up with the Trollstemt.
And even right there, trolls are a happy medium between Puritans and outright Satanism. Like, even right there in your decision of that name shows that the trolls are in between, which is just I said we were going to drop it, but here we are again. That's just so awesome.
No, so the strange thing about Norway compared to the US, and I'm not going to be a TV gnome and pretend to know America very well, but it seems like you've had a whole range of TV channels. And in Norway, up until 1994, it was the NRK that was the main channel.
Mm-hmm.
So, which, is looking back at it now, it's almost sort of Stalinist, that you have one government channel and that's it. And you get to hear only sort of this angle. And we never thought about it. It wasn't like, Norway scores high on all these sort of democracy scales and everything. We never sort of. And probably people were reading books and doing other things than watching the one TV channel, but so there was a richer life than just the TV box. But it has been so. The interesting thing about doing this now is that the power is sort of it's shifting now. It's very clear to see in media from the sort of, I guess, mainstream media. I don't know if that's sort of the right term, but sort of these major networks are sort of losing ground to the podcasts and the digital era, sort of YouTube and TikTok and all these kind of new platforms, especially among the young. So actually, I was a little bit wary going into it, if this was going to be a very sort of, you can do this but not this, and you can not talk about this and all that stuff. But actually I found they were really sort of open actually with just this program. They were very open in sort of go out and do your thing to try to reach the young.
They're learning.
They're learning, and that's something I'm sort of proud of with this, is that when I go out to concerts now and I meet young people and someone says, oh, he did the Trollstemt documentary, they've actually seen it.
That is so cool.
So I think we had, in a small country of 5 million people, we had 300,000 people watching per episode, which it's not a huge number, but still it's good for a music documentary about folk. So especially young people interested in music. There have been so many positive, feedback about, I don't normally watch the national broadcaster, but I did see this one. So it seems to have been the that it's been telegraphed around that this is
Mhm.
something that's well worth seeing. Uh,
Oh, that
and
is so
and
cool.
and the sort of there actually was at least a dozen articles in Norwegian press about uh, now folk music has become youthful.
Hmm.
So people, journalists went to these clubs and actually discovered for themselves that it's not just, made up. So we managed to sort of change the narrative in a way from the old guys on the roof to the younger people. So I was very happy that this was possible,
Hmm.
because you never know. And I was lucky to get a really sort of open and nice, what you call it, a production manager for the program,
Yeah, yeah.
so that yeah, I wasn't given all these restraints. So,
Hmm.
but I do know there has been in earlier years, there's been very sort of the way of telling the story of folk music has been through cliches for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
And how sort of centralized that has been is difficult to answer, but at least that's how, in quite a large degree, it has been.
Awesome. I'm glad that they gave you the freedom to be more open about it, because and then luckily, you get a good response to it, right? The worst thing that could have happened is if they give you freedom and then it flops, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah,
then they're like,
yeah.
not doing that again. But
Yeah, yeah, and I remember because normally I do sort of independent productions that I
Mhm.
sell to TV channels, and now I
Mhm.
was working internally with the sort of hired staff,
Mhm.
and I was really, and some of them were really worried about, because they were used to, aren't we going to use mostly, archival things, and
Mhm.
they were sort of thinking about it very traditionally. So
Mhm.
I know there were a couple of people that were worried, but I was also lucky that there was this guy from the Gudbrandsdale who
Mhm.
was a fiddler who was hired in the NRK, and he was one of these magical people. He's from a farm. He worked in construction. He did farm work. He became a teacher, and then he became a journalist in NRK. So he had like a broad background.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, uh, he wasn't sort of the typical, if you know what I mean. Like
Yeah, yeah.
I hope I'm more open, but I have this sort of, both my parents are left wing academics,
Yeah, yeah.
probably what you would call coastal elite in
Yep.
America, but I've been trying to break with that as hard as possible.
Okay.
Not necessarily in the sort of political way, but sort
Yeah,
of
yeah.
just being more
Perspectives.
perspectives, being open for people, feeling
Mhm.
empathy, trying to understand different
I'm
perspectives.
breaking from my coastal elite parents by showing empathy. That is probably the most beautiful line of this whole interview.
I hope they don't listen. No, no, it's gonna be fine.
That's
But
great.
no, no. But so he was such a huge part also of sort of, he did the research for this, and he sort of got the idea of, we need to work with the trolls and the devil, and we need to sort of bring it to people where they are, and
Hmm.
not sort of look at it academically, sort of pedagogically archival. So we sort of bonded very well.
Hmm.
So it was a beautiful marriage of the coastal elite and the rural.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So I guess, should we tackle the question, the reason that you're here? The reason that Ingrid introduced the two of us in the first place. I think I
Yeah,
think we should
sure.
just I think we should just go for it.